We could say that all of this has been a run-up to the much-awaited moment of actually singing a few phrases from an opera. At last. The aria Il lacerato spirito from Verdi's Simon Boccanegra begins with a recitative. Here's a perfect example of how the great bel canto composers hand us, on a silver platter, the opportunity to take a running leap onto the rest of the phrase, exclaimed Platon when teaching, rehearsing, or listening. You can try the recitative. Ah, che dissi, deliro, ah, mi perdona. An example of other passages chosen for experimentation on our part came from La Traviata. È strano, in core scolpiti quegli accenti. Notice how these recitatives encapsulate nostra regola in their very structure. They start with 1 or 2 syllables, often exclamatory, and build up gradually, until by the end of the recitative the phrases are longer and often almost an arioso, blending into the aria that follows. Some other passages worth trying. Che gelida manina, se la lasci riscaldar, sung by Rodolfo in Puccini's La Bohème, and then Mimi's concluding phrases, altro di me non le saprei narrare, sono la sua vicina che la vien fuori d'ora a importunare, from her equally famous aria Mi chiamano Mimì. How much material in opera singing is an intensification of our preparatory exercises. You can gradually try your wings out with a more extended series of phrases, such as the first part of Rodolfo's aria in Bellini's La Sonnambula, Vi ravviso, o luoghi ameni, in cui lieti, in cui sereni, sì tranquillo i dì passai, della prima gioventù. Choosing experts that lie well within one's speaking range, Platon always insisted that we try to apply all the notions without ever straining or exceeding our limits in terms of decibels. Before attempting an entire operatic aria, students were encouraged to study arie antiche, the reason being that, though seemingly simple, they are in fact fraught with pitfalls. Platon was not the first to state that if one can carry off a performance of some arie antiche, one should be able to sing the most difficult operatic arias with success. Since their range lies mostly around the center of the voice, this has to be sonorously produced. Many high-lying or lighter voices have problems finding enough substance in this middle area. Then there is the musical poetical aspect. A meaningful and sincere performance of this repertoire requires particular attention to the poetic texts, usually written between the 17th and 18th centuries. And while working on these arie antiche, we were coached in the many details of techne, skill and interpretation combined, starting with intervals great and small. In our quest towards il canto esteso, or singing in an expansive manner, as Platon called it, the execution of intervals, whether upward or downward, is of vital importance. Disregard for this has led to much of today's unimpressive singing. I feel I need to add that superb vocal material is one thing, singing according to the rules is another. Aspirating succeeding notes was once anathema to all great schools of singing, yet for some time now even celebrated singers have seemed blissfully unaware of one of the basics of musical execution, without which the line is broken up, thus interrupting what should be a seamless line that creates a sense of musical and poetical perspective. Attention, then, needs to be given to a common device used especially during the 18th century, the appoggiatura, often the bane of a singer's and instrumentalist's existence. How many performers die out on the second note of the same vowel sound, and yet to keep that note activated, as Brendel puts it during his lesson on the performance of Mozart, is one of the most difficult tasks facing singers. While an instrumentalist can easily bind the two notes with their fingers, given a little practice, a singer has not only to keep the intensity flowing, but the actual position, especially if the second note is a descending one. And this note mustn't budge. Otherwise, again, the continuum is lost. Even where the written text requires the second note to be an echo, as in Susanna's recitative in The Marriage of Figaro, the placement of the second note must be identical to that of the first. So giunse al fin il momento che godrò senza affanno in braccio all'idol mio. Naturally, a lengthening of the second syllable is to be avoided. While certainly following the spoken pattern where the last syllable is lighter and shorter, but with the underlying principle of legato always in mind, the rule here again is to sing the second syllable as though it were on the same note as the first. Here, the act of expanding the rib cage while singing this downward interval is of great help in maintaining the necessary support. Platon's constant exhortation, non cadere, don't fall down, will ring forever in the ears of his students as they attempt to execute these vital details correctly. The way to equalize the position of the voice while singing intervals whether near or far apart is to place the voice forward for the low notes. The higher the notes, the further back they are to be placed. But most singing teachers will tell you that. The difference here, however, is that the voice should always begin sounding at the tip of the nose and gradually spread its way over the hard palate and down towards the soft palate. This ensures not only the final goal of freely produced high notes, but also maintains full resonance. And here again is another aspect of nostra regola, crescendo e allargando physiologically produced.
Le nostre anime
Both Platon's own scores and those of his pupils are riddled with arrows going up or down. An arrow pointing up goes above the note when intended to be sung in a high position, and below the note, this time pointing down if it's meant to be sung in a low position. Therefore, an upward interval, anything from a semitone to an octave and beyond, requires the note preceding the higher one to be very forwardly placed, shortened as discreetly and imperceptibly as possible, to make the higher note placed in a low position so that there will be as little discrepancy as possible between the two notes. The wider the interval, the greater care towards that first note, the more even the voice will sound. Downward leaps are to be treated with care. According to the rules already laid down, we start the high note, as we start any other note, at the tip of the nose. Let the voice continue to flow towards the soft palate and pick up the low note again at the tip of the nose. That way we have the entire palate resonating throughout the execution of this interval. And what about the passaggio? Tones in the transition area between registers can sometimes be difficult to produce without the voice sounding muffled or veiled. Many singers cover or darken these notes to ensure that they resonate. Platon always referred to his teacher's advice, which successfully obviated the need to resort to this device, which can make the passaggio notes sound artificial. If the placement and flow of the voice are correct, singing through the passaggio is no longer an obstacle. High notes. These should be automatic, Platon would say. He himself achieved enormous ease in producing notes which hold unspeakable terrors for many singers. If the center of the voice is easily and naturally produced, high notes should be an automatic consequence, was his attitude, as it was with singers of the golden age of bel canto. Here again is a paradox. For high notes, as well as very low notes, one needs to have even less air in the lungs than when using the middle register. Here it's important to underline a basic technical rule, that is, the more arduous our task, the higher or lower the note, the faster or louder we have to sing, then the more we should let go, abbandonare, of any accumulated tension before their emission. Platon was extremely interested to discover similar concepts expressed by Vincenzo Vitale, who sustained that the more difficult a pianist's task, the faster or louder or softer one has to play, the more the performer must abandon the arms and upper body, while the fingertips, however, continue to bear the necessary focus and weight. He also said that the longer one plays, the more hours one spends at the piano, the fresher one should come away from a session. Platon was delighted to find such words of wisdom in the teachings of a renowned teacher and heartily agreed that good singing shares these precious ideals. Diphthongs. Another fundamental aspect of vocal legato is the question of how to execute diphthongs as in mia, mio, tua, noi. Two syllables where the first vowel is the Italian I pose a particular problem in that the vowel which follows often provokes an unintentional movement of the central part of the tongue if it touches the corresponding area of the palate, thereby not only disturbing the purity of the sound itself, which now results in mia, mio, but also the flow of the voice itself. Much time was spent on gaining a greater awareness of the tongue's movements. Training here consists of practicing by separating the two vowels with a slight pause at first, mi-o, mi-a, and only gradually joining the sounds together. All diphthongs are to be sung with the first syllable as firm and as long as possible, as the score permits, and with the second vowel tacked on at the end, as in mi-o, and for the sake of legato attached to the following syllable. An example, O mio babbino caro from Gianni Schicchi becomes O mio babbino caro when practicing it. For those who think that the details such as these are mere quibbles, let them be reminded that the devil is in the details. Embellishments. With embellishments such as mordants, trills, fast triplets, gruppetti, and rapid scale passages, the fast notes need to be sung in the same position as the rest of the phrase and not as many even celebrated singers have been doing for decades, that is, lightening the voice, thus taking away the support and full-bodied sound. The opening phrase of Casta Diva from Bellini's Norma, consisting of a series of gruppetti, Casta Diva, is one outstanding example where sopranos often fall into the temptation of aspirating the vowels Casta Diva. Together with this, instead of making the gruppetti an integral part of the melodic line, the same singers gloss over the quicker notes, thus ruining the line and flow and diminishing the majesty of the characterization. You can listen to Rosa Poncel and Emma Calvé and see for yourselves. A device to get the voice going. In more recent years, Platon Shvets adopted an ingenious device to help start phrases where the first note is a long one starting with a vowel. Many examples come to mind: Amarilli by Caccini, Amor ti vieta by Giordano, Ombra mai fu by Handel. This device takes the form of a discrete acciaccatura, a kind of pre-echo, beginning on or just above the note itself. In 1980, Platon had lessons with the tenor Alfredo Lattaro, who had sung under Mascagni's baton, and with the young Callas in some of her early Wagnerian performances. At age 80, Lattaro's dramatic tenor voice was still intact. His demonstrations were an endless source of wonder and enrichment to us all, especially when he taught the Verdi and Verismo repertoire, the latter period being one that he had actually lived through. The fascination exuded by this lively personality lay in his instinctive approach to acting and song. His resonant Roman-speaking voice sounded no different when he sang. Aside from admiring these Italianate qualities of Lattaro's, Platon noticed that when the tenor began a phrase starting with a sustained A, such as in the Bach Gounod Ave Maria, he managed to hook the voice onto a properly supported, forwardly placed slot by means of an almost imperceptible lead-in, an acciaccatura, slightly sharp of the pitch of the note itself. Platon adopted this in his own singing. Later on, he developed this device to cover phrases starting with long notes, also beginning with consonants, not just vowels. To the almost inaudible acciaccatura, we now add an almost inaudible accent or two, depending on the length of the note itself. Through much training, the singer can whittle this intruder down to almost nothing, yet its presence, at least in the singer's mind, is an invaluable aid to getting the voice going and then continuing to resonate. Not too long ago, I watched a short documentary showing part of the rehearsal of an opera being staged at La Scala. At the piano sat an eminent conductor working with two of today's most illustrious singers. He looked up at the soprano and said, "What's the matter with your voice?" "Nothing, maestro. It's early and I can't get it going." "Well, get it going fast," came the gruff reply. How unwieldy a voice can feel at times. And when the only method at one's disposal is to huff and puff, it takes a good deal of effort just to get it to sound. Trills and thrills versus the mordant. According to Platon, the apogee of a singer's achievements is the trill. Only when the voice has reached its full bloom of freedom through sound technical preparation is a singer able to start working on the trill. No typology of voice should be exempt from possessing it, from the highest of coloratura sopranos to the deepest basso profondo. He was adamant in affirming that the mordant should be an integral part of the melodic line and is to be rendered according to the principles of crescendo e allargando, with the last note being the rival point and not, as many interpreters prefer, the first note. This rule is to be applied to mordants both short and long. The trill, on the other hand, Platon defined as a device intended as a shock to the system. It is to be executed by first preparing the way in order to create enough tension or suspense so that the ensuing trill will come as a welcome psychological release. The note preceding the trill is to be slightly elongated, as in a short fermata, but with the tension of anticipation actually expressed in the voice. Platon likened the effect of the preparation involved to drawing an arrow across a bow and then releasing it, with the subsequent quiver of the bow being the trill itself. Following the shock of this accented beginning, ideally there is to be a diminuendo while the trill continues. It concludes with a crescendo leading to an elegant resolution on the main note. Some stunning examples of trills: Patti, Paul Plançon, Caruso, Gallicurgi, to name just 4 very different types of voices and ranges. As for the study of this embellishment, there were no tricks to be had. Platon's own trill was admirable. One simply has to start with a slow mordant, that is, an oscillation of 2 adjacent notes, where the individual tones remain easily perceptible, countable, gradually increasing the speed of this oscillation day by day, or as fast as one's individual progress permits. This, then, is Nostra Regola in a nutshell. Now it falls to the artist to apply these rules to a performance that must bring the written score to life. So many issues to think about. For instance, within this framework, there will be certain words or even syllables an individual interpreter will want to emphasize, to linger on. There will be many written diminuendi which have to be incorporated into the scheme of things. Some phrases begin with a decided accent, while other moments require an agogic accent for the sake, again, of poetic emphasis. Certain phrases require the opposite of a crescendo e allargando, which becomes a diminuendo e accelerando. There might be a need for a diminuendo e allargando, a petering out, as sometimes occurs at the end of a large section or song or aria or instrumental piece. Here's where Nostra Regola comes to the aid of the singer or instrumentalist, who has absorbed its principles. Put simply, this template allows one to have an overview of the structural flow of a piece, to bring out the sense of direction, of intentionality, this way never losing sight of the intensity and momentum carried through the whole gamut of variations within the dynamic range indispensable to a performance that is alive. The paradox which Platon Shvets loved to point out in all of this was that in order for a performance to have a sense of moving forward, it's necessary to hold back the tempo. And what about rhythm and timing, that is, tempo rubato versus beat? Here's an interesting anecdote. Aside from taking private lessons with Tito Gobbi, Platon also attended his masterclasses for young professional singers from all over the world at Villa Schifanoia, Florence. In 1982, I was invited to work as coach during the 5-week-long classes, while Platon was there to study the finer aspects of Italian opera. And we were both present at a lesson on Ah, non credea mirarti from Bellini's La Sonnambula, where a diligent young English soprano sang it very ably. At the end of her performance, the normally affable Gobbi exploded. Pounding his fist on the desk in front of him, he said, "What's the matter with you young singers? Have you all swallowed a metronome? Caruso and Ruffo never sang a single phrase in strict time, yet the music they made was alive." We waited for Tito Gobbi to expand on his statement. Regrettably, the great man did not. He merely continued the lesson with comments of a more general nature. Could it be that he stopped himself in his tracks because by that time the diktat of conformity had already begun to overtake individuality in the performing arts, while gradually relegating Italy's glorious operatic tradition to the status of a museum piece? Platon maintained that the 20th century was the century of rhythm, as opposed to previous eras where melody had reigned supreme. It was his conviction that in the practice of the art of recitar cantando, rhythm is to be at the service of melody and not vice versa, as the anecdote concerning Gobbi's student sadly underlines. But then, with music all around us, it's no wonder that classically trained interpreters came under the influence of music produced according to principles at odds with bel canto. Until the end of World War I, opera singers who performed light music performed it in the same manner as opera, since songs written by composers such as Tosti, Arditi and Denza, to name only a few Italian examples, were not much less complex than many opera arias and required fine interpretative skills to pull them off successfully. Now, however, the gap between popular song and opera aria began to widen. Organized rhythmic flexibility, or tempo rubato, gradually gave way to adherence to a relentless beat. To gain a better idea through comparison, it suffices to listen to recordings made by any one of the plethora of great singers of the first years of the 20th century, and then compare them with more modern renditions. The earlier singers were performing while operas were still being composed, while this art form was still alive and flourishing. Composers were still around to approve or disapprove of interpretations of their works, and there were recordings available where great singers of the day are accompanied by the composers of the works being executed. Enrico Caruso sings Leoncavallo's Mattinata, recorded in 1903, to the piano accompaniment of Leoncavallo himself. Claudio Muzio sings an aria from Cilea's opera L'Arlesiana in a recording of 1935, with the composer conducting. In Maria Barrientos' 1928 recording of De Falla's 7 popular Spanish songs, she's accompanied by De Falla himself. Tenor Julius Patzak sings Morgen in a recording of 1941, conducted by Richard Strauss. These are just 4 examples. It doesn't require great scholarship for a listener to be aware of the rhythmic freedom that informs any performance of that period. Yet this flexibility, this hard-earned freedom called tempo rubato, is based on ironclad principles calculated to render a finely thought-out interpretation spontaneous yet logical. This élan was a feature common to all great interpretations of the period. It was in the air, so to speak. As with many schools of interpretation, if you want to sing with enduring mastery, not a single syllable is ever to be ignored or thrown away. Every note or syllable can and must be accounted for in technical terms. Only then can there be a solution to every problem. If, on the other hand, complete control should gradually slip away from us, the voice risks becoming an unmanageable instrument. To Platon's students, this warning made the study of singing sound arduous, but, as often happens in valid teachings, it eventually and paradoxically proved to be an ally, precisely because of the implied rigor. One soon realizes that this ideal is something to fall back on, a safety net that is there in case of doubt. A word about the ideals of the system. Life choices are a matter of taste. Opinions often vary. But it must be pointed out that for an opinion to be valid, it needs to be an educated and informed one. To conclude, just as Platon's firm beliefs spurred him on towards exploring and extending his vocal and interpretative potential and that of his pupils, so did this desire for an underlying, unifying force prompt him to formulate an all-embracing system. Wanting to know how it should all be done through concrete means, as he often repeated, led him to codify every aspect of vocal performance he deemed possible, as thoroughly and as honestly as his totally thorough and honest nature allowed. The originality of his vision lies in the fact that each facet of singing is simply another facet of nostra regola. Although a template can be only that, a framework within which an artist can work to recreate a performance, this particular template substitutes the arbitrary with the rational. The principles Platon Shvets either employed, adapted, or invented and then put together to make a whole are part of a brilliant legacy. In his Nostra Regola, we have an all-embracing method where technique and spirit are one and the same.